Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Each week, we gather to discuss how being a follower of Jesus impacts our everyday lives. Whether you have been a believer for a long time or still have lots of questions about faith, we would love to have you join us as we embrace the joy of a transformed life. Welcome back to another week of Tuesday Talks. My name is Bridgett, and I will be your host. And today I have with me the wonderful Amy Davis Abdallah. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here and chat with you, Bridgett.
Yes. So Amy is the professor of Bible and Theology at Nyack College, where she also leads Women, a rite of passage designed to empower women to live in the fullness of who God created them to be. And if that's not enough, she's also the author of the book of Womanhood. And so I went through the woman course myself, which is why I asked Amy to be on the podcast today as we discuss biblical womanhood and what it means to be a woman. So I'm really excited for this conversation. My first question I have for you, I have some fun questions and then we'll get into the meat of our conversation. First of all, to all the dudes listening, you can listen to this conversation. You have mothers and wives and sisters and friends. You need to listen to this conversation. And next week, you'll hear the dude side. We'll have a conversation on biblical manhood and masculinity, so you won't want to miss that. But you can listen to this conversation. But ladies, we're going to talk all about womanhood today. So my first question for you, Amy, is how did you even start this topic in your life? Like, we're all women, so we all can speak into this, but you have a message that you have shared over and over and over again. It's a life message for you. How did that start?
Well, basically, I went and I got my bachelor's, and I thought in addition to earning a BA, I was going to earn an MRS. So I thought I was going to graduate and get married just a couple of weeks later. And then in essence, like that's how I understood that my life would start. And I might have a job for a little while. And I was going to teach elementary school so I could take a couple years off and have the summers off and be with my kids, because the way that I understood adulthood for women was to get married and have kids and maybe have a job if you decide to have a job, because that's the culture that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. Well, as life would have it, as God would have it, that's not what happened for me. And so I graduated from college and I lived in South America, and I said, okay, this is where I'm going to meet my husband. And I didn't. Then I came back to the States and I said, in the Bible Belt of Pennsylvania, I must be able to meet my husband. And I didn't. And so I'm having all of these goals about this is what's going to define me as a woman. And I'm like, okay, and I understood myself as a girl because everyone treated me like that. So in my church culture, in the Bible Belt of Pennsylvania, they put me in the category of college student, even though I was no longer a college student. Yeah. And so but I'm in the fourth year of my career, and maybe I look young and everyone is like, okay, that's great. Okay. So I'm fine with the way that I look, but how do you not understand me as an adult yet? Mm-hmm. So I came to seminary and I'm like, there's where I'm going to meet my husband. And they don't call seminary cemetery for no reason. I dated a couple of different people, and it was just like, okay, this is not that. And I graduated, and then I stood in front of my first college class, and I can remember it. You remember I was in Boone Center. I was in 406, and I've got 40 students in front of me. And I looked at them and I'm like, I just felt like one of them, because I'm like, everyone's treating me like a college student. I loved my college experience so much in my undergrad. And I'm like, I just want to be with them. I want to be one of them. And this realization hit me where it's like, if I try to be one of them, I'm going to fail. Mm-hmm. And that's not what God would have for them, nor is it what God would have for me. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I've got to figure out what it means to be a woman outside of this role of wife and mother. Because I am, like, I was 29 at the time. I had gray hairs too, just a couple of them. I pulled them out that year. But I was like 29 at the time, and I'm like, I am a woman. Mm-hmm. How do I figure out what that means? And so I went through this whole process of just beginning to call myself woman and stop calling myself a girl. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in Christian society, as well as in our society at large, we have what we call like a sociological issue of extended adolescence, where people just never kind of come into their adulthood. And traditional cultures have rites of passage that give you some kind of definition. And so I wish someone gave me some kind of definition and helped empower me to help me understand, hey, being married doesn't make you a woman. Being a wife, being a mother doesn't make you a woman. None of this is what makes you a woman. You are as who you are, and we can look at it and so then I started researching it. And I got to do it as my dissertation topic. And no one reads dissertations, especially PhD ones. They're super nerdy. But there was one page that was practical, and then that became the rite of passage that I do now at Nyack, blossomed into the Book of Womanhood, and will hopefully continue to empower people not only at Nyack, but also in the world.
Yeah, that's so good. So you mentioned this whole idea is we as women are lacking a definition. Like, what does it actually mean? And so, Amy, what would you say is a definition for Christian womanhood?
Well, the way I look at it, it's more of a framework. So I don't want to say, hey, this is what you're supposed to be, because I think the church has been really good in fit into this box.
Yeah.
Come, here's your box. And if you fit into this box, then you're right. And there's some people who fit into the box that traditional churches have given them, which is great. And I'm happy they fit into the box. I never did. And it wasn't because I was rebellious, and it wasn't because I was angry, and it wasn't because any of that. It was just like, that's not who God has made me to be. And so I look at womanhood as a framework. And so when we look at all of this, we say, okay, a woman is on a journey. We look at it journey motif. It's like we're all at different spots on this journey, but it's a journey. And it's a journey that lasts our whole lifetime, the journey of Christian womanhood. And when we look at this journey, in this journey, we're seeking to develop 4 relationships. So we develop our relationship with God. We develop our relationship with ourselves. We develop our relationship with others, and we develop our relationship with creation. So it's kind of this framework. And what I see, like what the rite of passage does, and what I really want to do is allow women to just kind of reach deep down into themselves and figure out who God has created them to be in this framework, and then be that person and not feel like, roles don't define us, even though we use them as definitions all the time, but roles don't define us. God defines us.
Yeah.
And we need to make space to listen to God and listen to one another and develop these relationships so that we can say, hey, I'm a woman. That's a good thing. And this is what my womanhood looks like.
Yeah, that's so good. So can you explain for people that might not be aware, what is a rite of passage and why is that important in womanhood?
Oh, that's I wrote a whole dissertation on this. So
we'll link them.
So when we look at rites of passage, we look at basically events in your life that bring you to a place of greater agency. So basically getting a driver's license is a rite of passage. You have greater agency in your life. Graduating from college is a rite of passage. You have greater agency in your life. But so frequently we experience these rites of passage and we don't understand that something big has happened in our life until we look back. So an effective rite of passage, and that's what we try to do. The ritual theorists talk about ineffective rites of passage and effective rites of passage. So an effective rite of passage pays attention to the passage, looks for transformation, and involves an entire community in recognizing and being part of this rite of passage. And so what I do, particularly, we're looking at what the theorists call adolescent rites of passage. And you see these in traditional cultures where men and women had to prove themselves in some particular manner. And then the society says, okay, you're a man, you're a woman, you have new privileges. We don't have rites of passage in the United States. And in the absence of rites of passage, what frequently occurs is that people create their own. And so you have gang initiation. That's a rite of passage. You have sexual initiations, and those are rites of passage as well. And so often the rites of passage that society at large creates are not necessarily good for the people. And so what I'm trying to do is say, hey, society is saying these things. And society does not always say, they're seeking to say more and more today that being a woman is good, but I still think that there is a certain amount of understanding in different areas of our nation and of our world that say being a woman is not good and is definitely inferior to being a man. And so what I want to do is create, like, in the subculture of Christianity and in the subculture even of our churches, in those kind of small contexts, how do we say, I do it for women because I can only call women into women. I can only call girls into womanhood because I'm a woman. And I would love to have men work on this and calling, because I have a good framework that they can figure out to help call boys into manhood. But I want there to be something positive where we as a culture recognize, hey, you are a woman. That is a good thing. And because of that, we are giving you the access and giving you agency in our subculture that recognizes that and then empowers you to live that out.
Yeah, that's so good. I think also just like the whole concept of we do in our souls, like we crave that marking period. Like I think we see that throughout scripture too, just even how like God would rename people when there was a new mission, or he would move them to a new location because there was a new season. And so I think there's something in us that like everybody misses out when someone doesn't come into the fullness of who they were created to be. So it's not just like their life lacks. It's because you aren't empowered or aren't able or weren't taught or whatever it is to be the fullness of who God created you to be, then everybody else lacks, because we all need to share what's on each other's lives. I think that's really good.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we kind of talked about is the role specifically in Christian church culture of women in the past was very much quiet, orderly, leading children, which again, if you're called to those spheres, that is fine. But we want to kind of break the stigma of, in order to be a woman, you must do X, Y, and Z. And so the opposite side of that, I think we kind of have in any conversation, you're going to have two really unhealthy swings. So you're going to have the unhealthy effects of feminism. I think that feminism as a movement does carry God's heart. But when we get it very self-empowered, that's where it becomes yucky. So we have this very much, in order to be a woman and be strong and confident, you must trample over men. And then you have the church swing of it that's very unhealthy is men are in charge, they get the last say, you must be quiet in a corner. And so we kind of get these two things, and we have women who don't know how to be confident, because if they're too confident, then they're bossy and controlling. And if they're not confident, then they're quiet and they're squelching the gift that God has on their life. So how do we navigate that? What is the difference between owning your confidence and being who God created you to be, and taking the unhealthy swing of being combative or being controlling with trying to make that strength control others?
And, that's a really, really, really great question. And one of the problems is that, so you were saying, okay, if you're too confident, then you're understood as bossy and controlling. Sometimes it's not just if you're too confident. There is this negative female stereotype that if a woman has power and has voice and is able to express that she's therefore bossy and controlling. Like you generally don't call boys bossy, you call girls bossy. And I guess what I look at when I think about confidence versus combative, when I think about someone who is confident, I think about someone who's confident and they're not tied to the result or the response of everyone to them. They're not tied to always being right. They're not tied to any of that. But combative means I am right, you must submit. I have it. And so that confidence, because I wouldn't even call that real confidence.
No, it's not.
Okay. So when I think about it, the only way I can think about it is like my development as a person in my classes. So when I first started teaching on certain topics in worship, I'm very interested in sacramentality, and I'm interested in other traditions of Christianity. And so I teach at an evangelical school. And when I first started that, I had just finished my PhD. And here I am, and I'm like confident, and I've always been kind of confident, but I'm saying all these things and not everyone's agreeing with me. And so I'm getting angry. Yeah. And I would say that's not real confidence, because if people's challenge to me or it's not real confidence. And so now, like I've been teaching this kind of stuff for 9 years, and this probably came in about 4 years, where it's just like, hey, this is what I think. This is what I believe. You and I can have a conversation. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine. I just want you to understand it from a different perspective. And so to have the ability confidence is having the ability to express what you think. Yeah. And knowing that what you think doesn't define you. Yeah. My worth is not defined by whether someone agrees with me or doesn't. My worth is not defined by whether I'm right or wrong. Because when someone disagrees with you, like if you're a confident person, you can express it. And when someone disagrees with you, that's fine. And and maybe you're wrong and you'll move forward. Like one of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this question, I thought back to high school, which was a really long time ago. And I was in this chorus in high school. And so I'm confident about several different things, but not always about my ability to sing. And so I was an alto, and I stood right next to the basses. And he was on the cross country team with me, and I can't remember his name right now, but he's like, Amy, why do you get so quiet sometimes? And I'm like, it's because I don't know the notes at those points. And he's like, hey, listen, it is far better for you to confidently sing loudly your wrong notes and be corrected than it is for you to just be quiet and hide.
Wow, that's good.
And so I think that's significant when we're thinking about confidence. Confidence is not about anyone else but me. Mm-hmm. Confidence is about me understanding myself, understanding my worth, not using it to force anyone else, but just being comfortable in that and being comfortable in my own skin. And if I need correcting, being able to receive that and not allow, and that doesn't define me. Like, it doesn't define my worth. Mm-hmm. I'm able to sing out those wrong notes if they're wrong. And if they're right, I can continue to sing those more strongly and do that confidently because what I do doesn't define me. God defines me.
Yeah, that's so good. I think one of the helpful tools for me has kind of been that heart check of what's your purpose for sharing this? Like, if I'm in with a team of, professionals or whatever it is, like, am I sharing this because I'm trying to show off? Am I sharing this because I want people to know that I deserve to be here? Like, let me perform and show you that, like, I'm worth it. You picked me to be in this room. Or is it like, I actually have a gift that I want to give, and it could be completely wrong, but that's okay. And just kind of having that heart check too and that's for anybody, that women just don't have to ask that question. Men have to ask that question too. Is what I'm saying, what I'm sharing, because I'm trying to be the best, or because I'm trying to give the best of what I have?
Yeah. And I would say, I like what you said there, because confidence doesn't always mean you're vocalizing. Mm-hmm. You can be confident in and of yourself and not have to share your opinion, because there are times, or your thoughts, because there are times when it's inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to do with being a woman. It has to do with being a human and understanding your situation, as well as, like, even understanding your personal situation one-on-one with another person. So it's in the large group. And then it's also in the one-on-one situations where you're like, hey, I'm confident, but it doesn't mean I'm going to share this with you right now. I don't need to, because confidence is something you possess. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you prove.
Yeah, that's good. I do want to also address, so in our local context, many of our listeners are from our local church, but we know we have listeners from all over, that we are in a place that we have men that love and champion women. And I'm very thankful for that. But I know my personal story, I didn't grow up like that. So there was a lot of healing, and still is a lot of healing, that the Lord has invited me into. And so one of the things that I actually walked through in college, the Lord gave me so many godly men, friends, professors, pastors that just loved me. And I would feel myself in classes, like only in like theology classes or things like that, where we're talking about the Bible, that I would be like, I'm not allowed to talk. And I wouldn't like think that, but like there was this thing in me like, oh, I'm not allowed to speak right now. And so the Lord, like, I remember he addressed it one day. He's like, okay, like, you have to go through every class, and you have to say one thing every class. And I literally was like, I'm going to die. Like, I can't do this. I'm going to die. And it was just something so simple of like, even if you're terrified because you have some church wounding there, like just really paying attention to the Holy Spirit of like, how can you take one little step? So it was one statement in a 3-hour class that I worked up to. And now I love sitting with men and women and talking about scripture and leading now, but just like that little thing of like, ooh, there's something inside of me that wants to stay small and shut down. And like, that's not okay.
Well, Bridgett, you didn't take a class with a female theology professor.
I didn't. I know.
You avoided me, Bridgett. So anyway, I just need to throw that in there. Because if you had that, I wonder if that would have helped develop that even more quickly. I think those small habits are really, really significant, especially in using your voice. Like I've encouraged students to just say, hey, if someone asks you to read something in class, just read. If you don't want to share your thoughts, just hear your voice and get used to hearing your voice. Mm-hmm. But hey, you didn't take me, Bridgett.
But I took woman. I was around.
You took woman, which is even better. Which
we will talk. Oh, actually, let's move the conversation, because I do want to talk about what is woman. I've always thought people, when you talk about, I have woman on Sunday night. What is that? What is it? It's a very insider lingo. So can you just tell our listeners what is woman? And then we'll kind of talk about some of the things that we talked about during that season.
Okay. So woman is a year-long rite of passage. So we've defined rite of passage. It's currently offered to seniors at Nyack. And the purpose of the woman is to develop develop an ability in women to name themselves women and to understand what that means. And it's in this framework of relationship with God, self, others, and creation that I've done. And so we have a whole curriculum. We read the Book of Womanhood. It's a year-long program. We meet once a month. There's mentoring. I guess the best description is like, it's a mentoring and empowering program.
Yeah.
We start off with an initiation. We end with a crossing over ceremony. There's videos of women sharing like their project of what it means to be a woman. And it's really just a process of owning who you are and figuring out how to offer that to the world. And I do it for seniors because I want to pair it with something in our world that is recognized as a rite of passage, and finishing your college is recognized as a rite of passage. Like you're recognized as much more of an adult after you finish that than you are when you have not, when you're in that process. So I kind of pair it with that. And these women go out into the world. And one of the reasons I did that was that I found that for myself, as well as for a lot of our graduating seniors, so many of them were floundering after college. They didn't understand who they were. And they were some of them ran into hasty marriages that didn't work out. And I'm not saying like no one should get married right after college. Many people should. I mean, there are people who should, but then there are people who shouldn't, and who are looking for a job or for a person to define them, a relationship to define them. And this was put in place so that these women understood how to define themselves and weren't looking for something else to define them as they graduated and went out into the big wide world.
Yeah, that's so good. I was forever changed by it. I am biggest supporter and love it. And I still, my necklace, there'll be days where I'm like, oh, I have to go do something really brave, and I'll wear it because it's just like, okay, like, let me just go back to what I learned and like what God like brought freedom in. And it's just my little like memento of like, okay, I just need to remember who I am and do this brave thing.
Right.
So,
yeah. Everyone who's gone through a woman has that necklace. I don't know if you got it when it was starting being made in Greece, but now they're all made in Greece.
Yeah.
I think you were the first year to get to receive that. So it's fun.
That's so fun. So, all right, let's talk about, so I'll share this. So in my, woman journey, I was at a conference one time at a local church, and I literally, like, they had like all these different stations. And so they had like these pillows where you can just go like sit at the foot of the cross. And I literally went and I laid face down and I said, God, I'm not getting up until you talk to me. Like, I can't move. I have to have you talk to me. And we were just kind of processing through just some of the false strength I was using against people to try to keep myself safe, especially like against men, of like really pushing men away and as a way to keep myself safe. And the Lord said, you've been using purity as a weapon against men instead of as an invitation into God's holiness. And that's never what I created sexuality for. And I was like, okay, like I didn't know we were going to have this conversation today. And it just unpacked something in me because I didn't understand, and we're going to kind of move our conversation into sexuality and all that kind of stuff. But for me, that was so transformative of like, oh wait, like I actually, by stewarding beauty and by stewarding who I am, like it's a gift that I get to give other people. It's not something I have to be ashamed of or something I use to manipulate others or need to hide so that my brothers don't sin by looking at me or any of that weird stuff. And that was just so healing. That was like probably one of the biggest moments I had during Woman, was that conversation with God on the floor.
That's so awesome.
I was like, all right, I heard your message. So let's talk about modesty for a second. That's a very Christian buzzword of what does it mean? So let's address kind of what do most people mean when they say modesty? That's my first question. What is this unspoken thing that people are trying to say when they talk about modesty?
Covering up, hiding. I think that's just basically it. That's what most people mean.
Yeah.
It's not what I mean, but it's what most people mean.
So that we're not causing our brothers to sin by looking at us or whatever it is. You wrote an incredible article called Why Modesty is for Me, Not Them, right? And I will link that in the show notes. People can go and read that. That was just really excellent. So my question for you is, number one, what does it look like to live modestly or live in a way that honors but doesn't hide?
That's a great question. And I guess live modestly for me is so much bigger than how you clothe yourself. And so I think you can put this. So what I want to frame this in a bigger picture. And the word that I'm going to use is really unpopular. Sorry. So I'm going to frame it in the picture of chastity. So the term chastity, properly defined, is not about the chastity belt. It's not about that. Chastity can be in all areas of your life because you're choosing to wait to experience until the time is right.
Yeah.
So, like I look at my kids and in like my older son is very sensitive to visual images. And so I can't even have him watch G-rated flicks right now. Because he's not ready for that.
Yeah.
And so I think like within the bigger picture of chastity, there's like this whole idea of in all experiences of life, I'm going to wait until it's the right time because then I'm going to enjoy it. And if I do it early on, it's going to hurt me. And so, I mean, you may not see how that links to modesty, but it links to sexuality.
Yeah, it does.
And it links to all areas of our life where it's like, wait a second, I'm not ready for that. I'm 13. I'm not ready for the R-rated movie. I'm not ready for those. And it's not just, okay, restricting. It's because you're not ready and it's going to hurt you. We don't want you to get hurt. And so in order for you not to get hurt, we're saying, just wait a little while. And in our culture, we're like, oh, we got to get it all done. We got to take care of it. But when we think about, I think what modesty has been used specifically in Christian culture. I mean, I talk to women who they just feel like they're supposed to wear baggy and they're supposed to cover up because everything about them is about someone else being caused to stumble. And so you've got to protect your brother.
Yeah.
And like behind that is like this utter weakness that is assumed of men, that they don't have any self-control, that if they are visually stimulated, then they're sexually sinning and automatically lusting, that they don't have the ability to look away from anything. And I think that is so insulting to men.
Yeah.
And it underestimates the Holy Spirit's work in men. And I'm not saying never think about what you're wearing when you go out into public, but it's not about how other people are going to look at me. It's more about like, how do I understand myself? How do I say, this is mine and not everyone gets to see it. But I'm going to adorn myself in a way that makes me feel good, that I'm not about hiding everything, because women have breasts and they are of all different sizes.
Yeah.
And you can't hide them.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, they're there. Women have legs and they're of all different sizes and you can't hide them. And at the end of the day, they're there. So what's appropriate to differing contexts? So when I'm standing up in front of a classroom, I think about what's appropriate to my students. And if I sit down, what's appropriate for them to see in this context? And it's not about distracting them. It's about appropriateness.
Yeah.
But when I'm out with my husband on a Friday night, I can dress differently because there are differing areas of appropriateness. And, you know, I talk to women who are buxom and they're just like, I can't wear any clothes if I'm going to follow the rules that I've been given of Christianity. And everything has to be like all the way up to my neck because my cleavage is almost all the way up to my neck.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, you have cleavage. Yes, there are places like, because I've been in international contexts and some places where women are absolutely stared at. So you want to be comfortable in yourself.
Yeah.
But it's not, and I don't think, and we're going to talk about sexy, but I'm going to bring that up right now because being sexy is not about showing all parts of your body. It's not about like, that's not what makes a person sexy or attractive or inviting. Like you can be absolutely sexy and not have, and have everything absolutely covered up because you feel good about yourself and you're walking in a way where you're just like, I have confidence and I'm happy in this body. It doesn't, and I'm not saying you have to be happy in a particular size. Like, I'm happy in this body because it's the body that I have and it's the body that God has given me. And I wouldn't define sexiness as it has to do with sexual intercourse, but it also just has to do with inhabiting you as a sexual person. And so sexual person is about desire and connection, but sexual person is about being a female in this case. Yeah. But inhabiting your body well and saying, this is good. These clothes are what I feel good in. I feel attractive. I feel good about myself. So being sexy is about being confident. Being sexy is not about uncovering or covering. That's not what it's about. It's about inhabiting your body well. It's about being happy with being female. It's about sex when I'm talking, and it's not not necessarily sexual intercourse, but it's about sex, about being female, biologically determined. But then it's also about sexuality, which is about being connected. And being connected is not all about sexual intercourse. It's about connected, and it's about connection to yourself and connection with others, both of the same sex and of the opposite sex. And modesty is related to chastity and is not about other people. It's about me. It's about my respect for my body, my respect for certain different arenas that I find myself in life. And it's about my comfort because our goal as women, when we walk out of the house, our goal should never be to have multiple men stare at us. Yeah. And if we're walking out of the house because we want all these people to be staring at us, both men and women, then we got to think about our motive, our desires, our motives as we're putting our clothes on. Our goals should be to feel good about ourselves. And with different types of figures, there are some people who are stared at almost regardless of what they wear, because there is this cultural kind of big picture. This is what you should look at and go for. But it's not all about the other person falling into sin, because I do believe it's not my responsibility. I think behind all of that, and that's what I read about in the article, is this sexualizing of women and this historical Christian and outside of Christian understanding that women are by nature temptresses. Yeah. And then if Eve weren't so hot, Adam never would have said, "Hey, I'll take that fruit." And that's not in the Bible. And it has nothing to do with who we are as people. We are human beings, and we need to look at everyone as in the image of God before we even think about their sexuality, before we think about whether they're male or female, before we think about whether they're even transgender. Like, we need to look at them and say, God made this person. They are by their very nature in the image of God, whether they're following God or not. And because of that, I'm going to think about them through the lens of there's something God in them. And so I better be careful in how I treat them, how I look at them, and we can do the same for ourselves. Yeah.
That's so good. I think one of the important things that you mentioned, just like when we talked about confidence, is that there is a beauty and a grace of sometimes reservation is the most beautiful thing we can give. And so not because we feel like we have to hide to make ourselves small, but like, what is the most beautiful thing that I can give in this situation? And so sometimes the most beautiful thing we can give is is putting ourselves together. You know what I mean? Like showing up with our hair done, a job interview. You're going to show up put together because you're honoring, this is an important thing. Sometimes it's sharing your opinion. Sometimes it's saying, I know for me, there's certain things that I'm not going to wear on a stage to preach that I might wear out with my friends. Now, it doesn't mean that one is good and one's bad. It means I'm honoring the context that I'm in. And I just think that's
you're honoring yourself. And that's one of the big things about honoring yourself and honoring who you are. And even if you don't feel like it's who you are, who you want to be, the person that you desire to be as you're living your life.
That's so good. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, being sexy. So I guess that question is it okay to want to be sexy? You said we're not going to dress so that we're, we want people to look at us, but what is the difference between, we kind of talked about that. What is at the root of the desire to say, hey, I want to be sexy. I want to be attractive.
Well, I think that when we're talking about sexuality, we talk about connection, but there is something with sexual intercourse there that is a special kind of connection. And so there's this attractiveness that we want to have, which is not a bad thing. And I think, in my tradition, it was like, oh my gosh, that's bad. If you want to be sexy, that's bad. Even though I do remember wanting to be sexy, although not fully understanding that, thinking that was in the low V cut. Yeah. Sure. Cause that's not what it's about, but to understand yourself and saying, hey, I'm allowed to be attractive to the other person, and to say, okay, I'm going out and I'm wearing this outfit and I feel really, really good in it. I feel good about myself. And if people look at you, because that happens, I mean, we live in a society, and I don't know if I'm looked at a lot because I'm just tall or because I'm attractive, like because I am much taller than the average human. And so people notice that. And like sometimes I just look at people because I'm like, wow, that is a really great outfit that person is wearing. Or that person has interesting hair. What's up with that beard? That beard is really, really long and I don't know what to do with it. But did you use your oil today? But but there's this, it's not a bad thing to say, I want to feel good in my own skin. We have, both men and women have hormonal cycles, and there are times where we are easily sexually aroused, and sexual arousal is not a bad thing, but it's all about what you do with it. And so if I walk out and I'm like, I feel really good in this, and maybe I walk out and I'm going on a date, and I'm walking out because like, I feel really good in this, and I want the other person that I'm on a date with to think that I'm attractive. Yeah. In my skin, in what I'm wearing. That's a good thing. It just can't be the primary motivation. Yeah. And I also think that it's not always about what you're wearing. Like we said, it's confidence that makes you sexy, but then that is related to sexiness. But I think also, like, to feel good in our own skin doesn't mean we're dressing up either. And while during our woman process that you went through, like, you're in a formal gown the last time, but during all our other times, you're in like a messy bun and like jeans or sweatpants or whatever you have. And there's something that's, when we talk about relationship with creation, like, there's something that's great. I was a tomboy growing up, and being able to lift things and go to the gym and do that also gave me confidence. Yeah. And there's something that is really good about that and sexy about that as well. It's like, you're feeling confident, and there's something about like inhabiting that body well, whether I'm gardening and digging in the dirt or just like rolling around on the ground with my kids. Cause that's kind of what you have to do sometimes. Like, yes. So there's so many different ways of that. And you need to figure out, I think it is often individually determined. Like, we decide what works best for us as individuals and how we understand it best as ourselves. And if we use that, the definition that the world is giving us, or a best friend is giving us, or any of this, we can look at those and think through it, but we've got to figure out what truly shows who I am when I walk out of the door.
Yeah, that's so good. So on the other side of that is self-hatred and the let me stay small and hidden. And so toxic self-talk is probably one of the biggest diseases that people, especially women, go through, of this constant reel in your head of, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not thin enough, tall enough, beautiful enough, whatever enough, good enough mother, good enough friend, whatever it is. How do we stop that? How do we get out of, if we have people who feel like the majority of their thoughts throughout their day are reasons why they're not good enough? How do we actually move forward into freedom so that that's not what we're thinking?
And goodness, like, in different areas of our lives, at different times of our lives, we struggle with that so much. And it's not just women, it's men as well. And I think women have it in so many different arenas. Sometimes it's like our physical body, our emotions are too much or not enough. And so, like, so often we're just, I've actually I've done some sermons on like, we're not too much for Jesus. Jesus can take it all. But sometimes we're like, okay, let me just stop it. Well, the problem is we don't do well with silence in our head. Like, we can't, let's just be silent. And I guess you have to replace it. So there has to be a replacement. And what I do is like, I'm like, okay, let's do low level spiritual warfare. The idea, I'm not good enough. No, I renounce that in Jesus' name. I am good enough, not because God says I'm good enough. And to renounce like all of these different things, and then to say, hey, I'm going to have a different record that goes through my head. And we talk a lot about mindfulness, and some Christians are a little bit concerned about mindfulness because some of it does come from Buddhism, but the truth is, like, some of the practices do, but the truth is mindfulness and meditation has always been a part of Christianity and Judaism. Like, it's always been there. And so to sit back and recognize that you're doing this is the first step. And sometimes it's just such a habit, we don't even recognize it. Yeah. So to sit back and recognize it and pay attention, and to say, wow, saying those things to myself really doesn't feel good. I'm never going to talk like that to my best friend. Like, I'd never say those nasty things to Bridgett. Like, why why do I say those things to myself?
Yeah.
Wait a second. Even though they feel true, they usually aren't. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, and that has so much to do with shame. I'm reading Brene Brown again. I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown, but she's amazing. She's a Christian, but her work is primarily research, and it's shame and vulnerability based. Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't have theology that comes out in her writing. But when you just sit there and say, because she's like, well, you need to be able to wake up in the morning and say, regardless of what gets done and what doesn't get done today, I am mm-hmm. still worthy.
Yeah.
And to go to bed at night and say, I am imperfect. And there are things that are really bad about me, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm a worthy person. And she just says, okay, worthy, but you're not worthy because of what you've done. God has said you're worthy. Yeah. God has said you're worth it. God has said all of this. And so for me, I read her and I add the God factor to it. Mm-hmm. And you need to recognize, you need to grieve, you need to renounce, and then you need to replace.
Yeah.
And so you need to replace that in every time you catch yourself doing that. But it's a whole process. Mm-hmm. And you also need to be merciful with yourself as you're going through the process.
Absolutely.
Of okay, so if you're in this continual toxic self-talk and you're at the bottom of that like spiral all of the time, and you just think of yourself as horrible like all of the time, then you've got to figure out, okay, what looks successful to you? Mm-hmm. Maybe it looks successful to have 5 minutes in the morning where you recite the good things that God has said about you.
Yeah.
And the truth that God has said about you. And maybe once during the day, you can stop the toxic self-talk with one of those truths. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a journey. Like we were talking earlier about like these like small habits that change. Mm-hmm. And it's a journey. And, mm-hmm. and we're so good at that. We don't verbalize what's going on in our head. And sometimes it's also really good to verbalize what's going on in your head, mm-hmm. because if your friends listen to you and they might like the shock on their face and the horror where they're like, that is just so far from true, mm-hmm. is really significant, because you're taking what's in the darkness in your mind where you're like, I believe this is true. I believe this is true. I'm terrible. I'm horrible. I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be good enough. And to recognize also events as events and not your life.
Yeah.
I was reading something this morning that was talking about the impermanence of everything. Yeah. Like every single part of our life is impermanent, mm-hmm. and yet we treat it as if it's permanent. Yeah. Like you know what? I failed today, mm-hmm. or I applied for this thing and they rejected me. Mm-hmm. That's impermanent. That's just a short period of your life. It's not permanent and doesn't define you.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So good. There are 5,000 more questions that I wish we had time to talk about, but I want to end on a fun one, which all of them have been fun. But for the dudes that have made it through this podcast, congratulations. We're so proud of you. So what do you wish that men knew about women?
So much. But I think that I wish both men and women were able to recognize our similarities before mm-hmm. we look at all of the differences. You know, when Adam saw Eve for the first time, and she didn't have that name yet, but when he saw that woman, he didn't say, wow, she's so sexy and so different from me. Mm-hmm. No, not at all. Like it's not about that at all. He says, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She's going to be called woman. And that word, she's going to be called Isha, just because I'm called Ish. Like that's like, there's so many similarities. Mm-hmm. Like we share so much more. Like men are not from Mars, women are not from Venus. We're both from planet Earth.
Yes.
And so when we talk about men, okay, so men are like, I have ambition. Well, women have ambition too. Mm-hmm. Women say, I have emotions. Well, men have emotions too. Mm-hmm. And we're culturally determined to kind of look at these and so different. And sometimes we express them differently, but often the differences among women mm-hmm. are just as much, if not more at times, than differences between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And so it's all dependent. Don't put me in a box. Mm-hmm. Don't say, hey, this is who you are, because that's not like women don't, I mean, just in the same way that men don't like to be placed in boxes, mm-hmm. women don't like to be placed in boxes, because it doesn't define 100% who we are. Yeah. And yet, so there's one thing, and maybe this is crazy, and maybe this is too graphic that I'm going to talk about.
Go for it.
But I wish men would be interested, and I wish women themselves would be more interested in our hormonal cycles, because our hormonal cycles affect us. Yeah. And you're totally into this, Bridgett. So you and I could talk about this forever, right? But it's not just about, okay, she's got PMS, so I better stay away from her. No, it's about how do we celebrate and understand like where we are at our cycles. Like, how do women understand that for themselves? That's a good part of women and our understanding of ourselves, and celebrate it and not say, okay, this is all bad. But women have a predictable hormonal cycle. And how do men recognize their own hormonal cycle? Yeah. Their cycle is completely unpredictable. And yet often high testosterone is very rewarded by our society. And so like, hey, you can be angry, but men's testosterone fluctuates during the day. And so not just like, oh, she's on her period, let me get away from her, but to say, hey, you know what, because you do this, because women do this, we're continuing humanity. Like without us, humanity would not continue. And so how do we, like, if I were to choose one thing, I would love for there to be an understanding and not an avoidance of that, not just for men and women together as friends, but for women themselves, and for us to recognize there are physical factors that are, and not always, there are physical factors that are affecting how great this conversation is right now. But sometimes there are physical factors that are affecting how bad this conversation is right now. And how do we recognize that in ourselves? And how do we, like, there's just such a celebration, because this is the way that God has made us. And I mean, there's so much more I would love for men to understand about women, but I think that understanding what affects us, and really understanding it, not being like, oh my gosh, that's just gross. Because it's not. Yeah. There's beauty in it. And so to understand the similarities, so if I'm going to define, I'm just going to do two of my favorite things, to understand the similarities, but then to also understand both of our cycles. And we as women need to understand that with men as well, and understand the similarities. I mean, because sometimes they do feel like aliens, and sometimes we feel like aliens to one another, but we're really not. And there's so much that's in common. And some of that has to do with like the mindfulness practice of thankfulness, of thanking, of being thankful for the good, because sometimes the differences are perceived as bad. Because we think that we're right most of the time, like whatever we are should be the standard for humanity. Yeah. But that's just not the case. And so to say, hey, I'm thankful for the fact that we're both emotional, but sometimes it's in different ways. I'm thankful for how do you rejoice in what is easy and what is similar, and in the little things that we bring to one another. And then also say, and here's a couple differences. And you're not in my box. You're not in a box. You're not always going to be emotional. Like women, not all women are. Some women have what is culturally defined as more masculine characteristics than feminine characteristics.
So good. So good. Well, as we end our conversation today, how can people connect with you?
Well, I am on Twitter, but I'm not very good at it. So I'm at Amy F. Davis A. I have a website, so it's amyfdavisabdallah.com. It's not under construction right now, but I'm revamping it a little bit, which is also connected. If you're interested, there is a Rite of Passage page there that also connects to the Rite of Passage, like for the students who are doing it right now, which is nyackwoman.wordpress.com. I'm also on the Nyack website. Like all of that's linked through my website.
Got it. So I will send people there. We will link that blog post, and then also I will link a copy of your book. So if people want to read that, they have access to that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bridgett.
Thank you, Amy. We had a wonderful conversation today, and thank you for all of you who are listening. Thank you so much for joining this conversation, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a review, and be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. If you would like to join our conversation on social media, be sure to use the hashtag TuesdayTalksWithSAC. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.